Michel Foucault's The Archaeology of Knowledge, an analysis of discursive systems and knowledge production. Michel Foucault's The Archaeology of Knowledge, 1969, stands as a pivotal work in the philosophy of history and the sociology of knowledge. Serving as a methodological treatise, it systematically elaborates Foucault's approach to analyzing historical knowledge systems, building upon his earlier investigations in madness and civilization, and the birth of the clinic. Crucially, Foucault shifts the analytical focus away from individual authors or isolated ideas to the broader structures, rules, and conditions that govern the production of discourse itself. This foundational text thus opens a pathway for understanding how knowledge emerges, evolves, and exerts power by defining what can be said, thought, and recognized as legitimate truth within specific historical contexts. To grasp Foucault's project, one must situate it within its rich philosophical roots. Drawing inspiration from structuralist thinkers such as Ferdinand de Saussure and Claude Lévi-Strauss, Foucault adopts the view that underlying structures shape language, culture, and thought. Yet he decisively diverges from classical structuralism by rejecting any claim to universality or timelessness, insisting instead on the historical specificity and contingency of discursive formations. This marks a transition toward post-structuralism, where knowledge is not seen as fixed or absolute, but as contingent, constructed, and intimately tied to shifting power relations. In this vein, Foucault critiques phenomenology's emphasis on subjective experience, exemplified by Husserl and Merleau-Ponty, proposing instead that subjectivity is shaped by broader discursive and institutional forces. Drawing heavily on Friedrich Nietzsche's genealogical method, Foucault also examines how power relations and historical contingencies shape knowledge systems, famously stating, "Knowledge is not for knowing, knowledge is for cutting," Foucault, 1969. Finally, influenced by critical epistemology from Kant and Bachelard, Foucault interrogates the conditions that make knowledge production possible in any given epoch. At the core of the archaeology of knowledge lies Foucault's redefinition of discourse itself. Rather than treating discourse as a mere collection of ideas or speech acts, he presents it as a systematic practice that produces and governs knowledge. Discourses construct the very objects they describe, such as madness, sexuality, or disease, and establish what is sayable, knowable, and legitimate within particular historical contexts. For example, 19th-century medical discourse transformed the concept of madness from a spiritual affliction to a mental illness, enabling new methods of classification and social control. This concept resonates deeply with contemporary critiques of how media, institutions, and professional fields shape public understandings of complex issues like climate change and health. Complementing this, Foucault introduces the notion of discursive formations, complex systems of rules that regulate the production, circulation, and validation of statements within a discourse. These formations determine inclusion and exclusion criteria, define authoritative voices, and allow for continuity or transformation over time. The transition from astrology to astronomy provides a clear example. As the discursive formation changed, so too did the criteria of scientific legitimacy, redefining what counted as valid knowledge. Analyzing discursive formations reveals embedded biases and power dynamics across academic disciplines, media representations, and policy-making arenas, highlighting how knowledge systems privilege some perspectives while marginalizing others. Foucault also employs the metaphor of the archive to describe the often invisible set of rules and practices that govern which statements can be made, preserved, and remembered in a particular historical moment. Contrary to a mere physical repository, the archive constitutes a structural limit on enunciability itself, shaping what is historically knowable. Colonial archives, for example, have traditionally excluded indigenous oral histories, thereby privileging European narratives and erasing alternative worldviews. Recognizing the role of the archive is vital for efforts to decolonize history and recover marginalized voices excluded from official records. Further deepening his analysis, Foucault elaborates on the concept of the episteme, the overarching framework of knowledge that defines an era's intellectual landscape. Each historical period, from the theological Middle Ages to the scientific Enlightenment, possesses its own episteme, shaping what is considered rational, true, or meaningful. Shifts between epistemes signal profound transformations in cultural paradigms and intellectual practices, shedding light on the dynamics behind scientific progress and cultural change. Integral to Foucault's framework is his refined concept of the statement, or énonce. He argues that meaning does not reside in isolated sentences but emerges from the statement's position within the discourse's rules and context. For instance, a medical diagnosis like depression gains its authority and meaning only through its institutional context within psychiatry. This insight encourages critical reflection on how language shapes power relations and social norms, emphasizing the relational and constructed nature of meaning. Challenging conventional views of authorship, Foucault also critiques the notion of the author as the sole originator of meaning. He proposes instead that the author functions as a role within discourse, organizing and limiting interpretations. The concept of Shakespeare, for example, functions less as a unique individual and more as an author function shaping the reception and meaning of texts within literary and academic traditions. This perspective informs ongoing debates about intellectual property, the collective dimensions of knowledge, and the boundaries of creativity. Foucault's insights extend beyond academic theory, bearing significant relevance to everyday life and contemporary issues. His analysis of discourse equips media consumers with critical tools to evaluate how narratives shape public opinion and influence social attitudes. By exposing the rules and exclusions embedded in historical archives, his work encourages revisiting and revaluing marginalized perspectives, thereby supporting historical revisionism and decolonization efforts. Moreover, Foucault's attention to the construction of social categories like gender and race informs contemporary discussions of identity and power. This critical interrogation of knowledge production enhances critical thinking in education, research, and policy-making, fostering greater awareness of hidden biases. Importantly, his exploration of power and exclusion empowers social activism, offering conceptual tools to challenge dominant narratives and advocate for more inclusive and equitable social arrangements. Despite its profound influence, the archaeology of knowledge has faced various critiques. Marxist theorists argue that Foucault underplays the role of material conditions and economic structures in shaping discourse, warning that his focus risks obscuring underlying class dynamics. Postmodern critics such as Jürgen Habermas contend that Foucault's relativism undermines the possibility of universal norms or emancipatory politics, leading to paralyzing skepticism. Feminist scholars like Judith Butler both extend and critique Foucault's framework, adapting it to analyze gender construction while noting its limited engagement with embodied experience. Pragmatists question whether Foucault's emphasis on historical discontinuities neglects the practical utility of knowledge for addressing real-world problems. Additionally, empirical researchers sometimes find his abstract methodological framework challenging to apply to concrete case studies. In conclusion, Michel Foucault's The Archaeology of Knowledge provides a groundbreaking methodological framework that challenges traditional conceptions of knowledge, history, and power. By introducing key concepts such as discourse, discursive formation, the archive, episteme, the statement, and the author function, Foucault equips scholars and students alike to critically examine how knowledge is produced, regulated, and wielded. While the work is subject to ongoing debates and critiques, its influence spans sociology, history, media studies, cultural theory, and beyond. Above all, it invites us to question dominant narratives, uncover hidden power structures, and envision alternative ways of knowing and understanding our world. If you found this exploration insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into critical theory and philosophy. Your support helps us bring complex ideas to life in accessible and engaging ways. Thanks for watching.